Three Men and a Bible, exploring the Sunday Scriptures. Join Father Panagiotis Boznos, Nick Lionas, and Stephen Christoforou for their weekly Orthodox Christian Bible study. They're three friends who hang out every week and explore the Sunday Gospel and epistle readings.
Huzzah!
Did. Congratulations.
Oh, actually, that reminds me. We went to a place with my in-laws, and it's called Hey Nani, and it's literally like, Hey Nani Nani, the way that I feel like Steve would appreciate. Because I guess the people that made the place met at like a Renaissance fair, or a Renaissance fair, if you will.
Oh, Hey Nani Nani always reminds me of Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was having a text conversation with a hierarch who will remain unnamed, who was commenting on the length of my facial follicles, and I made a reference to Life of Brian. I told him I was going to a stoning later, and he didn't get it.
You didn't appreciate the joke?
Mm.
That's a shame. It is our joy, by the way, to welcome back now. Can we officially declare John the fourth man? I mean, are we at the point like we can regularize this?
We'll see how the day goes.
Because as happened last time, I think what's happening is John is subbing for you, who is subbing for me,
Yes.
who is subbing for Nick Lionas.
For Nick Lionas, yes.
Which is again not the best way to organize things, but it's what we do.
Yeah. Does that mean that I need to be distracted and then engage with people in the comments while everybody else is trying to talk and hold a conversation? Since I'm
how the turntables. Someone's got to
since you're filling in for me, you just need to be a jerk to everybody. And
anyway, you were saying, Steve?
Wrong.
No. Apparently, I say that very distinctly when I'm talking to my wife, and when she says something, I'm just like, no. And our youngest daughter who's 2.5, has picked that up, and she was not happy. President was not happy.
Oh man, that's funny. See, I don't know. I don't think you say it on the podcast anyway. Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe I just disagree with my wife more than I disagree with you guys. No.
Because you love her more. Johnny on the spot. There he goes. Although he's missing his B2B mug if he's going to fully immerse himself in character.
Well, I'll look to my mailbox.
Mm.
That can be arranged.
Did you send him one?
Are they for sale?
No, because we have a couple at the office, I think, possibly. We do have some, not exactly like this. The design is slightly different on our Teespring, which I think you can actually access under the video. I think it links up with YouTube. But anyway, I'll see if I can find one of our original presents.
I didn't purchase mine either.
Okay, then I don't feel bad just saying I'll be looking at my mailbox.
With bated breath.
Yes, although it'll probably show up in 50 pieces.
I mean, then it becomes a puzzle.
Why do they call it puzzles? No.
What's that from?
I don't know.
How I Met Your Mother? Let's
Never
we'll call it
watched it.
puzzles, and then everyone will be like, "Well, why do they call it puzzles?" Anyway,
When they were thinking of opening the bar. Yeah. I recall now.
Well,
I just got a trip down memory lane about all those things, about those get-togethers up at seminary.
were you guys watching How I Met Your Mother without me?
Maybe.
Dang
I
it.
may have been watching without. I don't remember who all was there.
I never watched that show.
I didn't pick it up until later.
We had parties. I purposely bought a flight suit so I could flight suit up for the party.
I do remember that. One of the many costumes worn at Holy Cross.
When we weren't playing GoldenEye in the basement.
Or Mario Kart in the third floor lounge.
Yes. Giving viewers a peek behind the curtain that's in seminary life. Does anybody else have any charming banter to share, or shall we get into today's festivities?
I think we should begin.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a better way to kill banter than to ask for more banter.
I Christoforou this conversation.
Yes.
Always a welcome addition to any get-together.
Let the Christoforouing commence.
Let the Christoforouing commence.
We would like an awkward silence in about 5 minutes. I'll call Steve.
My ears are tingling.
Can we schedule the end of this conversation for 5 minutes from now? Yeah, I'll get Steve on that.
You count on me.
Give him time to drum up some fact that'll completely befuddle everybody into complete silence. Still one of my greatest memories from my time at school.
See,
I can close my eyes and I'm in Tasty Burger.
Oh yes, the origin. Maybe we'll tell that origin story one day.
I like that it's just ours.
All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down upon death by death, and to those in the tombs he has granted life. Jesus, having risen from the grave, as he foretold, has granted us eternal life in his great mercy. Amen.
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 So we are continuing now with our reading of the apostolic readings, since we've gone through the Gospels of these weeks. And we are the third, officially called the third Sunday of Pascha. And so this liturgically commemorates the Myrrh-Bearing women. And the reading is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. It begins, "In those days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists murmured against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the body of the disciples and said, 'It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God and serve tables. Therefore, brethren, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Holy Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word.' And what they said pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch. And they set them before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands upon them. And the word of God increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith."
Amen.
Steve, where do you want to start?
Oh man. I mean, we've got a lot of things to go on here. I guess the where do we start here? I think maybe a little bit of for me, maybe the thing that kind of like always draws my attention is like what this is saying about the life of the church, and we can sort of maybe begin to dig into that here, right? Because what is the and we can unpack this in a variety of different ways. Because what's the kind of like the problem and the solution that the apostles are facing, right? The problem is, even though the goal of the church is to make sure that all of these people within their care were being fed, the widows and the orphans, a bunch of them were not. And there becomes this crisis point, right? Like here is something that we have been called to do as a church. It is not happening. What do we do with it, right? And you think about sort of a decision tree that the apostles could have said, like, well, we'll take over this responsibility, but they don't. And this entire new order of service, the diaconate really comes out here. And And I don't know. I mean, like even that moment, it's interesting because we were kind of talking about this ahead of time. Like, there's a variety of angles that we can use to talk about this. Like, we can talk about what this says about the life of the church. We can talk about what this says about just the nature of like leadership and the choice that the apostles made. I mean, it's very rich reading.
Conflict. We could also talk about what this conflict foreshadows. Do you want to start there?
Sure.
And then go back. Because we've got two groups within the church, and it's important to note that up until this time, the apostles they've been jailed, they've been flogged, right? They've been suffering persecution from without, but now there's dissent from within. That dissent comes between the Hellenists and the Hebrews, which are the Hellenists are Greek-speaking Jews, so people not from that, people theoretically not originally from Jerusalem, but who have moved to or been heavily Hellenized. So essentially not the native Jewish population versus the Hebrews who speak Aramaic and Hebrew, right? So there's this distinction between, I mean, at this point, they're all followers of Christ, but we're not yet dealing with Gentiles who are Greek speakers, who are what we normally would think of as Greeks in the ancient world. We're dealing with Greek-speaking Jews, Hellenized Jews, and like indigenous local Hebrew Jews. That, go ahead.
And maybe for a little bit of context too, because people have probably heard of like the Septuagint, right? It's maybe worth just highlighting like the number of Greek-speaking Jews that would have existed at this time, right?
There are more Jews outside of Israel than there are inside Israel. I think the numbers, I was actually just heard a podcast about this, and I think that the estimated numbers are about 3 million Jews worldwide at this time, with maybe 1 million living in the province of Syria, which is where Judea was. So you're talking about Alexandria has the largest population, and then Rome has the next largest population. Thessaloniki has a large population. So these major cities within the Roman Empire have large Jewish populations. And in those areas, they're speaking and reading Greek. And so since this is after, this is still relatively recent after Passover and Pentecost, the population is still very mixed, and Jerusalem swells and contracts depending on the liturgical season, and it has people coming in from across the empire to stay there. And if you would imagine that those people who were in Jerusalem for Christ's entrance, they were in Jerusalem for his resurrection, and the celebration of Pentecost, which again were major feasts on the Jewish calendar, that they perhaps might have stayed. And so you've got these two different populations, those who are primarily Greek speaking and those who are primarily Aramaic or Hebrew speaking.
Because again, right, it's worth saying, I mean, like it's silly, but like travel was hard back then. Like if you're making the trip to Jerusalem, you're not just like,
and your God shows up.
What's that?
And your God shows up.
Yeah, like you're going to stick around for a while.
Stay for a while.
Right? There's no $25 Spirit Airlines flight that you're going to sort of take back. You're not sort of popping back for the weekend or whatever it is.
Hey, honey, I know I said I'd be back next week, but
the Lord
is here.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, the worst flight I've ever flown was Spirit Airline to Dallas.
That's because you must have never been on Allegiant.
Well,
yeah.
Clearly, this podcast is not sponsored by Spirit Airlines, so very raw conversation. Well, I apologize
banana
for
in
that.
The seat in front of me, like in the back, the seat back, there was an old squished banana.
Oh, it wasn't even like a banana with physical integrity. It was like
no.
Oh, no. That was a symbolic sort of, I don't know, prophetic moment.
It was indicative of the whole trip and everything that came out of it. Anyway.
Back there.
So, and the point being, there's these two separate communities within the church, and this is going to be something that pops up again in Acts in another, as we get into missionary work to actual Greeks, right? Pagan Greeks. And so the early seeds, or at least the early foreshadowing of a dichotomy between Semitic followers of Christ and Hellenistic followers of Christ, is something the church is going to have to deal with throughout the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And into the early period.
And to even tease that out further, right? Like this is a version of this becomes the background against which Paul writes his letter to the Romans, even about like how these Jewish Christian, I mean, there it's more kind of like Jewish versus formerly pagan, right? But like that kind of tension, right, between different kinds of people who are now making up the body of Christ with different assumptions and different backgrounds and different sort of like identities, right? Like how all of that, the tension is we're sort of shedding this to become one in Christ.
And you can take it out of ethnicity and bring it to class, and then you have St. Paul's letters to the Corinthians, at least First Corinthians for sure, about the disparity within the division within the community based on the rich and the poor, and that at their meals, right, at the agape meals and at their celebration of the Eucharist, there is a distinction between those who have, you know, a lot to eat and those who have a little, and what we're seeing is the church from the very beginning has had to struggle with how to make a homogeneous community out of different groups, because the message of Christ is universal, and therefore the church has to figure out, how do we create, and what transcends, what are the things that need to be transcended to be a follower of Christ. Here we see the example of language, because theoretically they're following the same, they're not from different religious backgrounds, they're from different ethnic or linguistic backgrounds. Language, class, culture, ethnicity, you know, and then, you know, these are the things that need to be transcended because they create divisions within the community.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, because Chrysostom says that he doesn't perceive it to be on purpose, but he doesn't shy away from still calling it an evil, which I thought was really poignant, because it needs to be a recognition for all of us that like these things do come up, and they still come up in the church today. But even though our intentions may not be what we perceive our intentions to be, it is a small evil that is creating division within the church, and we see it from the earliest stages.
I think, John, that's such a great point, because we can make it sound really malicious, and St. John Chrysostom says it's not about malice at all. It's carelessness, right? And because they're not actively trying to transcend these divisions yet, the divisions persist within the church where they're not supposed to belong, right? And I think that's a great point, right? You can even remove the moral culpability of it, but it doesn't change the fact that it still falls short of the ideal of the kingdom. Right?
Yeah. Because it's interesting to think even about this kind of dispute with some of the language that we see in like the prayers of the church, the services of the church, where we talk about like the like Christians as a yenos, right? Christians as a nation, a people, you know, you can translate that a variety of different ways, like a race. Yeah. Like we are called to be this one thing, not a collection of different nations, but sort of like the nation, right? This nation that has been lifted out and kind of called into the household of God. And yet sometimes even to this day, right, we still kind of have our own little, intentionally or not, maliciously or not, right? We have these things, these little subgroupings.
But that's where the image of the Trinity is so essential for us as a church to understand, as Metropolitan John Zazoulis talks about, you know, the relationship between the one and the many, right? That you don't, when you transcend your class, when you transcend your heritage, when you transcend your culture or your language, you don't lose those things either, right? It's not when I say homogenous, it's, you don't lose the individuality, right? But there's this tension between we are one body and we're all members of it, right? And so it's a matter of, we're not denying anyone's, right? You don't have to stop being who you are. You need to, I'll be cautious with that.
You clarify who you are in relation to Christ,
clarify
right?
who you are, right. You don't need to lose those things that differentiate you, but they need to be transcended and overcome and united to the rest of the body, right? Because it's when there are no distinguishing factors, then things become an amorphous blob.
Yeah, and there's no unity that's possible in an amorphous blob. Like a puddle has no internal unity. It's just a puddle.
It's just a puddle.
But a body, which has arms, feet, elbows, knees, like
has differentiation, but they all serve a greater purpose, right?
Yeah.
And that's the differences here between the Hellenists and the Hebrews. They are not fulfilling their purpose, even though there's differentiation.
Yeah. And it creates this moment of crisis. I mean, it's very interesting that like the pericope starts with the disciples increasing in number and ends with, and the word of God increased. Like there's this kind of like growth, and we think about the church as having this exponential kind of growth, but it reaches this friction point in the middle of this, like something kind of arrests this forward momentum of the kingdom. And it's this reality that there are these inner divisions, intentional or not. We're not actually making the kingdom present. There's favoritism. There's, those people are not mine, out of sight, out of mind, whatever it is. But like this growth and multiplying of grace just kind of feels like it comes to a screeching halt, in the middle of this reading all of a sudden, until it gets addressed.
So how do they choose to address it? They take it on head on and say, I'm gonna fix this problem myself.
They burned themselves out by taking on more responsibilities. Right? No, I mean, like it's very interesting because there's like two interesting moments, right? I mean, we can talk about this. There's it is not right that we should giving up preaching the word of God to go serve the tables, right? So the apostles are sort of saying something about their unique calling. Mm-hmm. And it's also not right that the ministry of the tables should go unfulfilled. So we're going to take this ministry and we're going to empower and invest somebody in this, delegate to it, right? To use that sort of language. And this is where the deacons come from. Like the apostles are still doing their thing. This other thing needs to happen. And so they find, traditionally we say the 7 first deacons to go and take over this particular, but even there's wrinkles there that we'll talk about.
Except they didn't really find them.
They didn't.
That's true. That's a good point. Who found them?
They left it to the people. So you guys, you pick, which I think is, astute in that, okay, the problem is that these people are feeling that they're being wronged. These people don't necessarily see that they're being wronged. So you all get together and you work out the 7 best people that you think are going to fulfill what you want to see out of the church. Who are the people that are going to do what you wish to have coming forth from this body that we've created?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is interesting, right? Because like we're talking about an ordination, there's like this laying on of hands and these people are ordained, and the acclamation of the worthiness of these people is coming from the people, right? Which like in our kind of contemporary practice has become more of like a formality than anything else, unfortunately, right? Like we wish somebody axios as opposed to declare them worthy. Like I think those are very different things, but these are the people that these are the 7 people that the people have put forth as candidates are worthy. And then, there's the laying on of hands and this acclamation, but yeah, I think it's an interesting wrinkle.
Well, it's important to see all three bodies, for lack of a better term, involved in this process, right? So you've got the apostles who are defining the role, defining the scope, and performing the laying on of hands and calling down the Holy Spirit and ordaining these men. You've got the 7 men themselves who submit to that, and you've got the people who provide those 7 men. So there really is, all 3 bodies are involved and participate in this process, which we see, because we brought it up and we're kind of dancing around, so we'll go right on to it. Right? We see in the ordination sacrament in the Orthodox Church that all 3, the candidate for ordination, the bishop who's doing the ordaining, and the people are involved in that process. Not in the way we normally think, right? We normally think like, oh, well, the people have to say axios, right? That's their response.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's
not-
awkward.
Well, it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's not awkward if you don't say axios, but what I'm saying is, right, there's this popular belief that like when the people say axios at the at the ordination, like that's their consent. But at that point in time, that person's already ordained.
Yeah.
They've already kneeled down. The bishop has already put his homophorion on the head, and they've already read the prayer of ordination. At that point, it's done, right? But where we see this, and we see it more clearly, is when they're bringing the candidate to address the bishop. So before he's ordained, before the prayers are read, if it's a deacon, if he's being ordained to the diaconate, deacons will bring him. If it's a priest, bishop, whatever. So they bring the candidate in front of the bishop, and they chant.
And you see, like, physically, right? Like the candidate is sort of
like,
taken by the arm
taken
and
by the
brought
arm.
forward.
And by two other clergymen. So the candidate's in the middle with one person on the right and one person on the left, presumably to keep them from running away. I don't know.
Which happens.
But then they'll chant Kelevson, which means command. We use that in the church, right? In the Greek tradition, they'll chant Kelevson, which is in the singular, Kelevsate, which is in the plural, and then Kelevson despota. Donin prosferamenonsi is the rest of it. So it's command, which means give the command. We use that same word in the Vesper service. If there's a hierarch, the chanters will go in front of the hierarch, and they'll chant Kelevson, and then whatever the tone is. That they're literally asking the hierarch, or they're asking the bishop to give his blessing, give the command that they chant whatever hymn, the Kierkegaardia that they're going to chant in whatever tone is prescribed. But it's a formality of going to the bishop and asking for him to give his consent to whatever we're going to chant. So that same thing is presented at the ordination. The first one, the singular, Kelevson, is addressed to the candidate. Give us your command, give us your consent. Kelevsate in the plural is addressed to the people. Give us your consent. And command, give us your command. And then the third one, Kelevson despota, is addressed to the bishop. So all three bodies are like sought before the prayers of ordination to give their consent and their command that this ordination proceed today. So,
So if you're going to object to an ordination, that's when you object.
That's when you do it. If you're going to object then. Don't object afterward, and then be very, very ready to run. It's like worse than, I don't know, worse than not walking out on a wedding. But the point being that liturgical thing that we do now, we see that established here with the way that the seven deacons are selected and who does what role within it. Yeah.
Which is another, like, again, this is a theme that we pick up frequently, right? The way that these things are kind of like fleshed out in the history and life of the church, because like you see it here in the scripture, right? And you see even reference to the laying on of hands. Like there's a lot of detail that is left out. Like, how exactly does this happen, right? Like, how were they picked, right? It kind of like glosses it over. And in the lived experience of the church, like that's where you actually see like depth to this. Because like this thing, right, that we're reading about in Acts 6 is the thing that happened, to you, Father, when you were ordained to the diaconate and when you were ordained to the presbyterate. Like it's, the scripture itself is a thing that we can only fully understand in light of the lived experience of the church. Like even this thing, ordinations and so forth. Like there's no manual to ordination in the book of Acts. And yet it's a thing that we've been doing, since then. We raise it, and I think it's just important as we're thinking about like what does it mean to understand the scripture. Like we're appealing to the lived experience of the church, not just like a textual forensic analysis, because this is the text of a community. This is a record of the lived experience of a community that still exists. Like we're still, the same ordination is the same thing that you experience, Father.
Yeah, and so this establishes the responsibility that it's the apostles or the those who fulfill the role of bishop, overseer in the church, that have this right and this responsibility to ordain. That the candidates, we have that they need to be full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, describes them, and that they're selected and put forward by the community.
Yeah, it's not ambition, right? Like you don't sort of put yourself forward as like, hey, this is a good career path that I would like to embark upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the community needs to be involved and put you forward.
Yeah.
That's always something that I've actually preached on it before, and I question frequently is why isn't it more like this today? Why aren't we as parish communities picking out the best from among us and sending them forth to go to seminary, to lead our community, to be able to come back and lead communities? It kind of works kind of like we said, it's the opposite. The person decides on their own, they go away to seminary, they come back, and then, it just happens that way. But I talk about this. I've talked about this more than once when I get to give sermons here in Dayton, and that is we really gotta, we can't look at the priesthood as something that people just do if they want to. We should be encouraging this.
Mm-hmm.
These people were given the task of finding 7 people from among them who they thought were wise and that were up to the task. Mm-hmm. Well, we see, people grow up in our parishes. We know, who might be good at this. Why aren't we encouraging this more?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we encouraging this more?
Well, it depends on how Greek your mother is.
Yeah, because she wants her kids to grow up to be doctors and lawyers and accountants.
Yeah,
she definitely doesn't want them to grow up to be priests. I have an uncle who would have been a great priest, but his mother told him no.
Really?
Yeah. And older generations and things. I'm making light of it, but
it's true.
But John, I to your point, Father Niccolo Yanni of Kansas, right? He was the Antiochian priest in Kansas. That was
Apostle to the Plains.
Yeah, Apostle to the Plains. We'll get a Damic plug in here. That was exactly how he was selected by the people of that community, and we see that occasionally. I think that practically mobility has made it difficult because you're not dealing with the same community, whereas in the past you'd have right. There's not really upward mobility, and there's not, even if there is upward mobility, you're staying put in the same place. Like, how many times have I moved in my life? Dozen at least. So there's more transience between parishes and between communities, but also I think it's really important to remember that what is our definition of the most basic Christian community? Because we oftentimes start at the parish level, but in reality it's the local, it's the diocesan level, because the fullness of the church is bishop, priests, people, bishops, priests, deacon, people, right? Like all orders of Christianity, right? Because the laity
Saint
is
Ignatius
an order.
For another
Right.
Damic plug.
Yeah. But without the bishop, you don't have a church. And we can talk about this later because there's some stuff about priests in the end. But the office of the presbyterate and the office of the episcopacy were synonymous in the early stages, right? So you don't start getting quote unquote parishes or parish priests until the church gets too big to be managed by one person. But the interesting thing between a priest, and this maybe people will disagree with me. I'm a witch. I'm fine with it. The priest has no ministry in and of himself. Neither does the deacon, really. What you see is the apostles, and the bishops are the successors to the apostles, as the apostles are the successor to Christ, right? Like that is the ordained position within the church. You have bishop and people. That is the most basic relationship, because the bishop represents Christ and his people, and his ministry is everything. The priests participate in his ministry to the extent that he allows them to, but they have no ministry in and of themselves.
Yeah.
The deacons participate in the ministry of the bishop in as much as he allows them to, but they have no distinct, right? You cannot be a priest without a bishop. You cannot be a deacon without a bishop. You can't even be a deacon without a priest, really. You can't invest yourself as a deacon. You have no right to even put on your vestments without somebody else giving you the permission to do so. And when the bishop is there, no one does. You cannot get vested. You cannot celebrate or exercise your quote unquote your ministry unless the bishop gives you the blessing to, which shows you the fact that it's all his.
Yeah. It's
And
delegated
so
to those
it's delegated.
other orders.
Yeah. It's delegated, but it's not essential to those orders. It is shared with those orders, but it's not theirs in and of itself, right? Right. So I don't know where I was going with this. But for that point, the community is a lot bigger than just the parish, and because we're so spread out in this country, even in our most densely populated areas, we're still spread out. Our relationship to our hierarchs is nowhere near what it should be for that model, for that theological truth to actually be expressed in reality. And that makes it difficult, because you got to think more so than just like a parish community, like what is across the entirety of this diocese are we cultivating the next generation of leaders. And I would say that there's probably more of that if you look at the big picture than there is if you look at that granular level of like our parishes developing their next leaders, because the point is not for a parish to develop its next leader because the parish only exists because the bishop, right, because the bishop lets the priest do it, for lack of a better term. So if you take a bigger picture of the church, and when I talk about the church, not as a parish, but as a diocese headed by a bishop, I think you see more of that. I think you see more bishops actively cultivating people than you might see parishes. It's still probably not enough. But
because it's hard because of what the diocesan model is in the United States, right? Like you compare it to kind of a traditionally Orthodox country where you've got like your diocese is 2 hours across, let's say, right? Not even. Yeah. Whereas now, now the way we have like metropolises and dioceses in the United States, like your diocese could be like 7 states across. A very different sense of like what that means in terms of the relationship between bishop and people, and even the character of like this thing that we call the local church. Yeah.
But since we're on this topic, I want to like jump into the fact that like administratively, we now view the bishop as the chief administrator of a diocese, whereas the apostles, their role was primarily prayer and preaching. Those are the two things that are, those are the two things that are foundational to that apostolic ministry. And in fact, what we see later on is when we talk about what eventually will become what we know as the priesthood, but is referred to throughout the scriptures and the life of the church as the presbyterate, right? Because it's presbyter and priest they're slightly different terms. The presbyterate was a council of elders that handled administrative things. And then the bishop began to slowly, to use that word, Steve, to slowly delegate some of his liturgical responsibilities, some of his preaching responsibilities to the presbyters when the church became too large for him to do all of those things. But he was still the primary liturgist, right? So primarily the bishop was first and foremost the one who did the teaching and celebrated the sacraments of the community. And then when the community got too large, he shared those things, but he shared those things with people who were originally doing administration. We've now almost inverted those relationships where the primary preaching and liturgical life of the church is done by the presbyters, and the administration is handled through the hierarch.
Yeah. Which is an interesting like historical story. if anybody's curious out there, there's actually a short little book. I think it's called like the History of the Episcopacy or something like that. Like Ancient Faith Publishing has it. It's like a short little volume that talks about, what the episcopacy looked like, in that apostolic period, how it changed through the Byzantine. It's an interesting little bit of historical stuff if somebody's interested in learning a little bit more about that. Pretty short, accessible book.
Is that Ancient Faith as well?
It's published by Ancient Faith, yeah. Look, we are part of the Ancient Faith cinematic universe by virtue
part
of
of their
this.
family. We are members of the Ancient Faith
Cinematic universe.
Yes. Called cross promotion. Is anybody else cross promoting us? No.
I mean,
please
pay attention. But that's a really good point, right? And it's an interesting way that there's like that sort of development and sort of just like change in some of these emphases over the church, right? Which leads, right, in practical senses, even to that conversation about what the church is, right? I grew up with this language of you're like a member of your parish, right? Like the way that some of these like liturgical and whatever functions have been delegated to the parish, like we've actually, here in the United States anyway, we sort of learned to identify ourselves not as members of the church or even members of the local church, but I'm members of Saint whatever my church is down the block, right? Here's where I pay dues. Here's what I whatever. Like, it's interesting how these things actually change our self-conception, change our sort of like sense of our relationship to each other, even some of that like language, right? Like I'm a member here, not there, even though it's the same church under the same bishop, right?
Mm-hmm. Sorry for that major digression.
No, we're learning.
But even still, I mean, I don't think it's a digression only because, okay, so we recognize that this is the way that the church was set up back then. Well, what does that mean for the church now? Like we have to, I think part of the beauty of this passage is that, okay, obviously things are different now than they were back then, but how can I take what I'm reading and make it work for the church today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very clearly, I mean, you have the apostles who recognize the needs of the laity, but you also have them kind of enabling the laity to pick up that mantle themselves and have an active role in those choices and those decisions. And that's, I think that's something that everyone needs to hear, because I do think, I mean, how many times do you, if there's like a general assembly, it's almost, second nature now to have like, and if we don't get enough people to have quorum, then, this also serves as a notice that we'll be doing it 2 weeks later without quorum. Like the fact that even, we're not picking up that mantle as the laity. So, but also again, from the top, it's like, well, the apostles didn't try to just take it on all themselves. They didn't decide that they were the best decision makers among themselves as to what would be best. They allowed the people to have that. And so I think from both ends, you have important messages and important lessons to be learned about the inner workings of a parish and how that actually leads to a healthy parish. Because again, at the end, it's, things started up again. People were multiplied. People came to the faith. It's like, this is the benefit of having a healthy parish, a balanced parish, a parish where everybody's involved and everybody is able to do what they're supposed to be doing. If the more people we have involved, the healthier it's going to be. And when it's healthy and when we're doing the things that we need to do, then people are going to come to church.
Yeah. And I think that the best way to look at this and see that is that the apostles knew, essentially they knew their calling. They knew their purpose. Their purpose was prayer and preaching. That was what they were called to do. And so anything that got in the way, right? That's probably a bad way to put it, because as Steve, as you said, right, the ministry of serving the tables is an essential ministry of the church, because without it properly executed, there was division within the church. without it, there's like this blip in how the church is actually able to function and fulfill its calling, right? But this goes, to like, we're not all hands, we're not all eyes, we're not all feet, right? Like, and
just because something is important doesn't mean I have to do it or you have to do it, right?
Right. And I think that's a problem. And I'll say this just as a clergyman myself, right? That's something to be cognizant of as a leader within the community. And I mean that beyond just the ordained leadership, but all leadership in the parish, right? Like from parish council to ministry leaders, right? Knowing what we are there to do. And then if there's something that comes across our path that is kind of outside of that scope, finding the right person to do that. Because it's not that it shouldn't get done, and it's not that it, doesn't need to be done, but the question is, like, does this need to be done by me, or am I the right person to be doing this, right? Does this fulfill the purpose and the calling that I'm intended to?
Yeah. And this is where it's interesting, because like even the way that contemporary, management people or whatever will talk about this, like it's actually like an interesting lesson for us as Christians, because I can't remember who, it's probably just an aphorism at this point, right? But like every time you as a person with limited time and limited attention say no to something, you're actually saying yes to something else, right? And it's kind of important for us as Christians to be mindful of whatever particular calling that we have, because when we say no to something that is a distraction from that, not that it's bad, right? Just not something that I am called to do. Like you're ultimately saying yes again to this thing that God is calling me to do. Like I shouldn't be doing X. It's important, but this is the task that God has placed before me. So when I say no to this, I can focus on the thing that God is actually asking me to be faithful to.
And it sounds haughty and conceited if you don't add the caveat that you're then responsible to make sure that it gets to somebody who can, right? Not to neglect it, right? At no point, and St. John Chrysostom is very clear on this, at no point did the apostles neglect the service of the tables, but they also knew that it wasn't their calling to do. I'm trying to find, let's see if I can find what he said. Oh, I guess I didn't quote it. Well said. For the needful must give precedent to the more needful, but see how straightway they both take thought for these, the inferior matters, and yet do not neglect the preaching. So they take care of what is not on their plate by assigning it to somebody else who can execute it and do it well, and don't neglect it. And at the same time are then able to give their attention to the thing that is needful for them, which is preaching.
Yeah. Which again, I mean, like that's such it's a very practical thing for us to keep in mind, whatever, as we said, our particular leadership or role or whatever in the church is, right? But
the first where I think we struggle the most is we can't make that decision because we can't define what our purpose is, or we struggle to define what our purpose is. Both as individuals, but also as parish councils. What is our purpose as a parish council? Like, what are we really there to do? What is our purpose as a ministry leader? Like, how often do we ask people, right? Because think about this. Think if they had asked 7 people who didn't understand what they were being asked to do, but just asked them like, hey, I need you to serve tables.
Yeah.
But didn't explain why, didn't explain that this is part of the ministry, that it is as essential as preaching, that you serve these tables, that the widows and the orphans need the daily distribution because we are transcending, the divisions within humanity so that we can be united in God's kingdom. Like explaining that purpose to them. And they chose 7 men who understood that, because these 7 men are members, we can talk about them in a little bit, members of the 70 that Christ originally sends out narrated in the Gospel of Luke as apostles. So they've walked with Christ. They have been part of the Christian community for a while. So they know what the purpose is. And so it's easy to put them in that position.
Yeah.
But if you don't take the time to do that, and you just throw somebody in, I need you to do this.
But not even from the aspect of explaining it to them, but also if they hadn't even given it much thought. If the apostles said to them, hey, pick out 7 people, and they're just like, yeah, Tom, John, Nick, you got, come on. Like, if they just didn't even think about it, I think that's the other thing, is maybe something that we also have to look at as, as Steve was saying, in various leadership positions in the church, whether that's parish council or clergy, whatever it is that there has to be a recognition of what you're good at and what you're not good at, and what other people are good at and what they're not good at. And we don't just kind of blanketly say, hey, we're looking for people to do this. I think it's
Intentional.
Yeah, more intentional and meaningful if you approach people one-on-one because you've put thought into it and said, hey, this is what's going on. This is why it's important. This is why I can't do it. This is why they can't do it. And so we're coming to you.
Yeah.
It's important. We need you here. Let's bring this in as just another piece of this community we call church.
Mm-hmm.
To make it even more nuts and bolts than that, right? Which is why it's helpful for parishes to have like mission statements, and then particular ministries in a parish to have a mission statement, and for roles to have like a job description attached to them. So we can say like, this is why this is important. And also this is I'm not just telling you to minister to the tables. Like, this is what I'm actually asking you to do. Right. Mm-hmm. Which again, like all of that, thank God, was there between the lines. Like, these were people who were part of this community for a long period of time. But I don't know, that's I think a challenge for us as Christians to sort of be very careful about our articulating our why, and also very careful about articulating our what and how, which I think just from the position of volunteers or employees who are thrust into situations where they don't know what they're being asked of or how to do it. Like,
that's not scriptural. Stop it.
I'm reading between the lines.
You missed your moment, Father Panagiotis. No. You missed your moment. I saw it on your face too. I could see you. I know you so well. I could see you. I saw that. You're like, I saw it coming. I was hoping you would just, no.
Shoot, I missed it.
I'll say something you disagree with again. Don't you worry.
It was on a.
But I don't actually disagree with it.
Teed it up for you.
But the problem is, it takes work.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. Like, John, what you're describing, and again, I'm not trying to make us all sound lazy, but what I'm saying is that the level of care that we are seeing in the scriptures for how this is being handled by the apostles and the community, to John, to your point, right? That the community is the one really thinking about these people, right? That these are not just quick fly by the seat of your pants decisions. These are decisions that are prayed over, right? They are considered, and then, with God's guidance, the people act. But oftentimes we don't wait for God's guidance. Oftentimes we don't pray and consider. We just act. I got something that needs to get done. Well, I can do it myself, or I can ask somebody to do it, or I can train them how to do it. Forget that.
Let me just do it now, and then do it again next time, and then do it again next time.
Because I can do it faster.
Yeah, maybe in the short term, but in the long term.
In the short term, yeah. But in the short term, I don't think that the apostles were unable to serve tables.
Right.
Right. There's nothing about them that says these guys could not handle distributing bread to the widows.
Yeah.
Nothing that says they can't do that. Considering they took up 12 baskets full of bread from the multiplication of the loaves, right? Like, they can do it.
That's true. They fed thousands of people in that moment. Yeah. You're saying they chose to. They realized, like, this is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
This is also important. I'm going to give this to somebody else.
Yeah.
That's fair. We are approaching our hour, but I know we want to talk a little bit about, you have some interesting things to say maybe about some of these people on the list.
We don't even have time for these things.
I know.
Okay, so of the seven, Nicholas, the last one who's mentioned as a proselyte of Antioch, he becomes the father of a heresy that grows in Asia Minor, and then Christ himself repudiates in the book of Revelation the angel of the Lord as he's dictating the letters to John. Twice mentions the followers of Nicholas, Nicolaitans, which is an adjectival word I've never come across before. So the question is did his followers kind of misinterpret what he was preaching when he went about preaching, or was he really a father of a heresy? Saint Irenaeus and many other fathers of the church do put the blame squarely on him. Saint Irenaeus says that Nicolaitans are the followers of that Nicholas, who was one of the first seven ordained to the diaconate by the apostles. They lead lives of unrestrained indulgences. The characters of these men is very plainly pointed out in the Apocalypse of John, when they are represented as teaching that it is a matter of indifference to practice adultery and to eat things sacrificed to idols. That's Saint Irenaeus. And the letters in John, I mentioned them twice. This is Christ himself kind of dictating through the angel. This is verse 6 of chapter 2. But this you have, that you have hated the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So Christ was very clear about that one.
Me too.
One more time later on in chapter 2 to the letter to Pergamum. But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children to Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. Thus, you also have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which things I hate. Very, very clear.
Those are like the two core things, like idolatry, sexual immorality, like again and again, the two basic things.
Yeah.
Nicholas is like doubling down on like the two basic things.
Yeah. So there's 6 of 7 in their choices, which is something for us, because we've been talking about how involved the laity need to be. We need to not give them a hard time if they make a bad choice.
1 out of 7 will become an idolater.
Let's not guarantee.
And many of the priests were obedient to the faith.
And then that last line that says many of the priests were obedient to the faith. There's a textual variant there. The preferred text by the Patriarchate of Constantinople is many of the Israelites were obedient to the faith, which makes more sense, because the word there for priests is not presbyteri, which is the word presbyter, which is what is used through the rest of Scripture. We don't see the word ierevs used. If I would have to do a search on it, but every time we're talking about the ordained office, we are talking about episcopi, which are bishops, presbyteri, which are presbyters, and diaconi, which are deacons. Even today, when a quote-unquote priest is ordained, he's ordained to the order of presbyter. Ierevs, that word that means priest, is a sacramental word that's used, that's later applied to the high priest who performs the sacrifice. And going back to what we were saying before, the presbyters did not have a liturgical function. They had more of an administrative and advisory function. So the fact that the word priest is not applied to them makes sense when you consider the fact that their sacramental role is not in and of themselves, but it's shared with them by the archierevs, or the high priest, which is the bishop, which is a term that's used for Christ, and thereby applied to bishops. So
yeah,
those few little fun facts.
Lightning round with Father Panagiotis.
Heretics and textual variants.
all in less than 2.5 minutes.
Very good for me.
Plenty of time for a commercial break. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I think that's an interesting note, because like again, maybe to make something clear, like when you talk about the presbyters as like the elders, right? Like, which is literally what that word means. The ones with presvia, the ones who have kind of like prestige, eldership, right? That's more of a pastoral kind of role, just like on the face of it, than something like more sacramental, like hieris or something, right? Like they're the elders of a community, those who are doing some sort of pastoral oversight rather than the delegated liturgical responsibility.
Yeah. The bishop is the celebrant of the liturgy.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, for people who don't know, right? Like even when a presbyter celebrates the liturgy, he's doing it, I mean, very explicitly, even in terms of like the liturgical objects in the name of the bishop with the blessing of the bishop.
Yeah.
Which for a lot of communities who don't see their bishop, but once a year or every several years, like we can miss that.
Yeah. Yeah. To the point that in the early years of the church, we don't have time to get into this. Never mind.
I mean, at least say it. At least say it. Resolve this melody.
This was so important to understand that, to use Zezulus's terms, what he calls satellite liturgies, right? So he refers to like parish liturgies as quote unquote a satellite of the one liturgy that's being celebrated by the bishop. So in the early periods of the church, especially in Western, in Rome and Western Europe, they would take some of the communion from the chalice of, or some of the body from the bishop's celebration, and they would bring it to the quote unquote satellite parishes and mix that with their communion to show that the communion that you're receiving, even if you're not actually physically present with the bishop, that's the bishop's communion. That was consecrated by the bishop. It's not consecrated.
It's the same cup.
It's the same cup. It's not, your priest is not actually, doing that consecratory work. It's still the bishop, and we're just bringing it to you, but you can't be there physically present, so we'll bring it to you, right? That's how tied this concept is, that there is one liturgy celebrated by the bishop. And there's other ways that in the East that was maintained, but again, I don't do anything of my own right. The only thing I do is I do what the bishop lets me do, because he is the priest of our diocese.
Yeah.
I serve at the pleasure of the president.
Yes.
That's a good last word.
Steve, will you conclude us in prayer?
Yeah. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Christ is risen from the dead, by death trampling down death, and on those in the tombs bestowing life. Lord our God, we thank you for bringing us together. We glorify you for this word that you've put before us, for the life that you grant us in the light of your resurrection. Help us to reflect on this word. Help us to act according to this word, according to the responsibilities and duties that you've placed upon our shoulders. Help us to do all things for the glory of your word. Help us to act in this spirit of generosity and faithfulness, and help us to do all things to the glory of your name and in the light of your resurrection. We ask this of you, O Lord, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, into the ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, John, for joining us again.
My pleasure as always.
No.
That'll be the last word.
3 Men and a Bible, exploring the Sunday Scriptures. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.